So a very warm welcome, everybody. My name is Nicola Mathers. I'm Chief Executive of Future of London. Really glad to see so many of you join us today to our discussion around how we can accelerate house building through collaboration within the public sector. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you haven't done already, if you wouldn't mind renaming yourself so we can see your first name and surname, just helps us identify you for the Q&A. That's really helpful, thank you. We really want this to be an interactive session, so by all means post your comments, your reflections, your questions for the Q&A session in the chat function at the bottom. You'll see that in your toolbar at the bottom. By all means do that at any point in time, and if you're on social media, to please join in the conversation using the hashtag learning from crisis. Right, let's make a start. So if you're new to Future of London, we are an independent network supporting those working in housing, planning, regeneration and economic development across London. And we do that through leadership courses, through insight and best practice, and networks to bring people together from across the capital. This session today, this morning, is part of our Learning from Crisis programme, which we put together in response to COVID-19, obviously. And that's been, in the early days, sharing how people were immediately responding to the crisis, but is now taking a more medium and long-term look. So this morning, we're going to be looking and exploring the potential for accelerating housing delivery of affordable homes through collaboration with the public and private sector. Now, obviously, we've got quite a grim context to this conversation, so the impacts of COVID-19, the reduction in construction output, the likely recession, the unpredictable market, the impacts of the cost of fire safety and net zero, and obviously the increasing need for affordable homes. So it's quite a grim picture, but what I want this morning to be quite positive and think about in that context, where are the opportunities for collaboration between housing associations and local authorities? And we've got a very well-paced panel to be talking about these issues this morning. We're going to be hearing from Geeta Nanda, who is the Chief Executive of Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association and is also Vice Chair of the G15. We're hearing from Jackie O'Donoghue, who is Operational Director of Housing at LB Redbridge, and Tom Cockley, who's Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development at the GLA. So a very warm welcome to our speakers. Just going to stop sharing my screen. So thank you very much to the G15 for sponsoring this event, and no doubt Geeta will be talking about the G15 offer for London at some part in our conversation this morning. So I'm going to start off by asking the panel 2 questions. We're then going to open it up to a bit of a panel discussion on the issues raised, and then it could be open it up to Q&A from all of you. So as I say, please do put your questions in the chat box anytime during the event this morning. So I'm going to start with the questions to Geeta, and then we'll go to Jackie and then to Tom. So Geeta, what are your top 3 challenges with respect to affordable housing delivery at the moment? Just help us set the context for this conversation. And in terms of an agenda for joint working, what would be on your list? Over to you, Geeta.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I think the top challenges have been outlined by you just as an introduction, really. Is a lot of it is to do with the external environment and capacity. So, you know, our bill, if you like, for building safety and fire safety, the unknowns, the lack of clarity and responsibility is, you know, one of the key issues will impact on any future affordable delivery. And, you know, I suppose it's just a reminder that, you know, the G15 as a group, you know, we provide a huge amount of the affordable housing and general housing in London. And, you know, we house 1 in 10 of the Londoners, and we're on track to build sort of 55,000 homes by 2021. So we're a big deliverer of affordable housing. So any change in terms of that capacity is going to have a big impact overall in terms of what we can provide. I think the second thing really, the challenge of the sort of cross-subsidy model, and you know, which we've had for a period of time, and the ability to borrow is being hampered, and grant rates per home is the sort of most important subsidy that we could receive, or some other land subsidy, in order to be able to build more affordable homes, and truly affordable homes. So I think that's the second thing for us. And I think the third thing really would be, for me, would be really around consistency, you know, long-termism. We know that, and we've all argued for this, housing as a sort of infrastructure, and you know, part of that sort of long-term commitment. But you know, we've got a huge amount of changing parts at the moment, and unknowns that are going to be coming in terms of you know, planning, and the type of homes that are being produced, and you know, how that will all be pulled together. And so with that, confusing rules around obligations and responsibilities, as well as an ever-changing environment and a lack of a long-term commitment, it makes it very difficult, because you have to put you know, you have to put that, those are the risks that you have to measure against the ability to deliver in a changing environment. So, you know, I'd say for me at the moment, those are the top sort of three things that are making it challenging in terms of the commitments that we can make. Just to move on to your agenda for joint working, I suppose that brings us to the point that unless we come together and share our sort of complementary skills, the kind of different risks that we're sort of taking on and how we can overcome that, our knowledge, skills, all of that, if we can bring that together, that is the only way we're going to overcome some of these challenges that we have at the moment. You know, they're not just restricted to the housing association sector, local authorities, you know, developers have, everybody's got similar challenges, you know, different impacts, but similar sort of challenges. So if we can find a way of truly taking what we've done so far and going to the next step in terms of collaboration and joint working, then I think we can and covering all those things that I talked about, then I think we can really sort of have some hope in terms of moving forward during this difficult time, so we come through it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Geeta. Over to you, Jackie. The same two questions. What's your view from a local authority standpoint?
Right, yeah. Hello, good morning, everyone. Yes, I've got some that are the same as Geeta, and some that are slightly different. And I guess we were always developing in a difficult environment, and it's now got so much more difficult. And the external environment and what's going on around us in local authorities makes things particularly challenging at the moment. I think one of the ones I'd like to highlight is resident resistance. What we're finding with residents is most residents, when you have a conversation about building new council homes, will say, absolutely, we really need new council homes. They understand the housing crisis in London. They see friends, neighbours who are finding it impossible to find affordable housing. But when we start looking at building near them, even in infill sites and redevelopment of HRA sites, the story changes slightly to, we absolutely need all of those council homes, but for X, Y and Z reason, you shouldn't be building them here, you should be building them somewhere else. And that is a consistent feature of the resident engagement we have in Redbridge at the moment, and talking to other councils and colleagues in a lot of areas. That's the issue at the moment. It's compounded, particularly in an outer London context, by real fears about changing density. People think that when we come along and we talk about building more council homes, they immediately think we're going to put towers on there, we're going to completely change the character of the area and so on. So there's a lot of work to do to demonstrate to people, one, high density doesn't necessarily mean high. And secondly, we always have to build within a context. And if we're building within a more suburban context in outer London, we're not going to change outer London into inner London anytime soon. But there is a great fear we find with people of that. Finance, of course, finance has to be my second one. Grant rates, I'd echo what Geeta's saying about grant rates. and the competing priorities within housing revenue accounts of building safety and also net zero carbon and a lot of retrofitting that is really desperately required across current council stock. And those pressures within the HRA, compounded with obviously the need to spend right to buy receipts, so there's a really, which we can only spend on new build, so there's a really careful juggling act that's having to be done, and costs rising are putting pressures on the HRA, and the COVID has put a lot of pressures on the revenue side of HRAs, which perhaps weren't there before. I'm relatively lucky in Redbridge. Our HRA is very sound, but nevertheless, we're having to look very carefully at how we get the balance between all of the things that we need to do with current stock and new stock going forward. My third one would be about skills mix in local authorities, not just skills within development teams or housing teams, but procurement, legal, finance. We've been on a learning curve, and I'll give a shout to the GLA now, because they funded quite a lot of upskilling in local authorities. But we're still not there, I don't think. There's still more to go. And particularly the pressures on the disciplines that are not directly involved in the programme but are absolutely crucial to it, like finance and legal and procurement. The stress and the strain and the other calls on their time, given all of the other things that are going on at the moment, often means that though house building is a priority, we're really stretched on that support side. How would we take collaboration forward? Well, I think we need to think joint teams, sharing resources. Lots of people have done that. We continue to do that. There's some good examples of that. But actually maybe thinking about that in a more sophisticated way than we have in the past, about how can we share good quality resources and staff across the peaks and troughs, because we're not all in a peak at the same time. And how do we do that so that we can share quality resources that make the best of the whole programme across London, but not enter into complicated joint service arrangements or long-term secondments or all that kind of thing, but actually do something that's quite flexible, that we can call on one another when we need extra for resident engagement, for instance. We need it now, someone else is not at the height of a resident engagement. How do we share those resources across more flexibly and be a lot more agile with what we're doing in some of those areas that are quite scarce? So that's me.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Jackie. Tom, I saw your head nodding a lot during both Geeta and Jackie's answers and responses. So over to you. What's your view on those two questions about the context we're working in and what should be on the agenda for collaboration?
Thank you. Yes, well, I mean, the thing about going last is everything's already been said, really. Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that Geeta and Jackie have already said. I do think that, just to start with, I do think that the public sector in London, in the form of London government, so councils and the GLA, do have this time around a much bigger role to play and a much stronger role to play in terms of helping us recover from this economic downturn than we did in the last one. And that might sound strange to say after years of austerity that have really affected local government disproportionately more than any other part of the public sector. But if you go back 12 years to the last recession, I don't think any councils, or very few councils in London, had a development programme. The GLA didn't have its devolved budgets on housing and our land fund. Now that's completely changed. The vast majority of boroughs are, to one degree or another, developing. The GLA, we've got our affordable homes budget and our land fund. So I do think that we're, despite all of the huge challenges, in a stronger place than in the previous recession to help us recover. In terms of the challenges, I think finance has to be the main one. Despite the budgets that we've got, that to a lot of people might sound quite considerable, for the £4.8 billion affordable homes programme we've got already, we know from the research that the GLA and the G15 did that we actually need more than that per year, not over 8 years, per year, every year for 10 years if we're to get up, just in London, if we're to get up to where we need to be in terms of housing delivery. And the housing delivery task force that I chaired in response to the pandemic also identified the need for a recovery package of about £3.5 billion, which would partly be for 10-year conversions within our existing programme to shift away from shared ownership towards sort of low-cost rent, but also a buyer of last resort scheme, which would help provide confidence to the market to keep building during the recession, with the guarantee that the public sector could take homes at cost price and convert them to affordable if that was needed. And I don't think you can get away. I mean, Geeta talked about and Jackie talked about grant rates, the problems with the cross-subsidy model. The cross-subsidy model wasn't particularly great anyway, even in the good years. You know, in an economic downturn, when the private market is shrinking, how is it expected to deliver affordable housing at scale in that environment? It can't. And you know, the new settlement for London of £4 billion over 5 years is inadequate. The second thing I would say, I think cladding remediation is really important as well. Obviously, it's a huge issue in terms of safety, but also because the government have excluded social landlords from the building safety funds, it means that our housing associations, councils are quite rightly prioritising building safety for existing residents over new build. But if they can't access building safety funding at the level that they need, that just takes finance away from the delivery of new homes. So I think that's a huge challenge as well. And finally, I'd echo Jackie's point about skills. We already had a big problem on this front before the pandemic with Brexit. We might be heading for a no-deal Brexit. Half of our workforce, construction workforce in London, are EU workers. And on top of that, 400,000 of our construction workers are going to be retiring over the next 10 years. So there's a big job that needs to be done in terms of skills in the construction workforce, and also, as Jackie said, within councils. And that's where I think our home building capacity fund has really been able to add value. And I hope that we'll be able to build on that in the new affordable homes programme. So those would be my three things. Finally, just quickly, in terms of partnership working, we're looking at what we might be able to do in the new affordable homes programme on partnerships between boroughs and housing associations. I think those could be really, really crucial. You know, boroughs are building again, but you know, a lot of them face struggles when it comes to recruitment and retention of the staff that they need. And I think programmes that look at partnerships, skills partnerships between councils and housing associations could be really valuable. And finally, I think there's a lot of collaborating to be done around modern methods of construction, which would also help to address some of the issues around skills.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's really interesting and nice to see that there's obviously a consistency across the three of you. And just, I feel like I have to give a plug for a couple of Future of London programmes. So we run on behalf of the GLA, the Council-led Housing Forum, which is all about bringing the different boroughs together who are doing direct delivery and helping upskill teams in terms of really understanding how the different approaches are working across London and what we're learning from that. And we also recently completed a piece of work for London councils and others on how local authorities can collaborate around skills as well, and looking at opportunities for joint commissioning of training, and there's all kinds of options. So that's kind of TBC at the moment. So, you know, we're sort of really kind of knitted into that agenda. I think I would like to start with, I guess, a question on the skills agenda, because I think it's really important. I wonder if you could, the three of you, reflect on how we might make the skills sharing work. And I know both Geeta and Jackie have been involved in skills sharing projects before, how housing associations and local authorities have worked together. So maybe just give us a little bit of detail about how they've worked. And really interested, Jackie, in your point about making it a little bit more sophisticated. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but yeah, just a little bit more on that I think would be great.
Should I go first? I mean, I think one that we've got running, and it wasn't done particularly for the house building programme, but it's one that I think has some real legs, is we have a joint, we're now running the procurement service jointly with Waltham Forest, which of course is another big developing local authority now. And that does help with the peaks and troughs point, so that though they work across both councils, they can bring shared learning and allocate resources depending on who needs it at the time. That's quite a formal sharing arrangement, but I think that certainly has legs, and I think that we call it PS Procure. It certainly is bringing some benefits, and we can use a lot more than that. I think some of the barriers are always about HR issues and everything having to be quite formal. And I haven't really got a great idea as to how we get around that, because of course if we are sharing staff, we do have to recognise and protect their employment rights. But something about somehow having something that is a bit more agile, that is easier to set up. I think we should put our heads together and with good HR people about how we can just lend one another stuff quite straightforwardly.
Thank you, Jackie. And I think if anyone in the audience has got any ideas or any experience of how we do that, that would be really helpful. Do please post that in the chat. Geeta, I don't know if you want to talk about Offer for London as well.
Yes, I mean, I think I know that when, particularly when lots of local authorities are looking at house building, and all those skills were lost from local authorities over many years, you know, the G15 were coming together to say, well, what can we do to provide that support, but also so that local authorities can front face it, because politically that's what they need to do. So, you know, it's not really around who gets any glory, it's about getting the job done, and, you know, making sure the job gets done, and lessons get learned. And, you know, I know we've all, as a sector, as housing association, loads of lessons over the many years around, you know, joint ventures with different bodies, around, you know, risks around development and sales, and it takes a lot to build up those teams. You know, as you know, it's really hard to recruit good people, to keep good people, to, you know, have those sort of teams in house. So we must be able to do more to share it. And I know there has been, you know, we have, and other housing associations within the G15 have got some good arrangements with different local authorities, either, and they are more formal, Jackie. I mean, it's, you know, it is one of those things. It's either sort of a joint venture arrangement where, you know, the local authority may be putting in some people who do the corporate skills around that, and the housing association may be putting the development teams within that, or the sales teams within that, or secondment arrangements. I mean, I know we took some secondees from the GLA some time ago to give people some experience of from central to the local about what happens. So there are various secondment arrangements going on in development management agreements, and some of those are successful. You know, they're successful because you get a transfer of knowledge and learning, and then once people are secure enough and they've learnt enough, I mean, they can then do it on their own, and they feel more confident about that. And I think that's a real success. I think, you know, we've certainly provided services for local authorities and for other housing associations, and then they got to the point where they say, we don't need you anymore. We think that's great. You know, we've given them our procedures, we've given them our risk maps, we've given them the, you know, all the sort of tools really. And you think, well, that's a really sort of good point. But I think coming to Tom's point about MMC, that is a real opposite. So sometimes there are existing things, but what are the new things? And if there are the new things down the line that nobody has the skills for, or, you know, completely new arrangements, then that's a good opportunity to think differently, isn't it? When there are existing things, you can sort of put arrangements in place, but when you're thinking, right, this is something totally new, so let's think totally differently about how we can get the right skills and not do it in the old ways. And I think that's where the opportunity lies.
I think that's a really good point. Tom, do you want to come in on that? Because it's in a way you're starting, well, not starting from scratch, but you're starting from an early stage, aren't you? So you can build a different model of working together where you're all learning at the same chance. Tom, do you want to come in on that point about MMC?
I think that's right. And I mean, one of the I mean, it's something that we're doing a lot of work on at the moment in City Hall, looking at how we as the GLA and boroughs can support MMC. It'd be great to work with housing associations on that as well, because one of the crucial things for you know, the companies that are producing precision manufactured housing is creating that pipeline of demand. And by collaborating, you know, we can really strengthen that pipeline. I think in terms of skills more broadly, really want to do more partnerships between boroughs and housing associations. I think that one of the issues for boroughs is if you're a big developer or a large housing association, and you've got your staff can sort of move around between all the different aspects of development and gain that experience, and that's more difficult in a council. So I think that there's real scope to do that in partnership. I think that, but I think Geeta's point about that moment of self-sufficiency is a really important one as well, because actually for a lot of boroughs, they want to do this themselves. There's a sense of sort of civic kind of pride about it. You know, councils used to be the ones who were doing this at scale, and you know, for the various reasons we're all aware of, they haven't been able to again until more recently. There's a real sense of pride about what councils are doing in terms of housing, and they do want to have their own independent development programs. So I think it's about forms of collaboration that kind of respect that sense that councils do want their own programs.
Okay, thanks very much. How about, I mean, one of the big issues is finance, obviously, and it is looking very bleak. Do the three of you have any ideas about the potential for using finance differently, using different models in terms of being able to kind of take this issue forward and ultimately deliver, whoever it is, whether it's housing associations or boroughs, more affordable homes?
I'm happy to. I was going to mention, I mean, it's been talked about for a long time. In fact, I remember Mr. Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, describing this as the Holy Grail, but pension fund investment and things like that as a sort of as an add-on, as it were, to sort of public subsidy. I think that's something that we need to do more exploration on. London First have been working on this, but it has been talked about a long time, and I think we're getting to the point now where, is it going to work or is it not going to work to help us deliver housing at scale? And the other thing I would add is, even if we do get it to work, it's not going to be a substitute for the kind of public sector funding that we've discussed already.
And what's your... Yeah, sorry, go on, Geeta.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there is lots of investment options now, equity investment options that sort of coming into the sector, or looking at affordable housing. Obviously, more sort of shared ownership where there's a sort of guaranteed income stream on the rents, and you know, so those pension funds are not so bothered really about the first tranche sales or whatever. They're more interested in the sort of rental valuation that goes with that. And I think there is, you know, that is definitely coming forward. There's definitely more of that happening. But I also think the lack of flexibility around the different pots of grants, you know, the sort of right to buy receipts versus the RCGF versus the grant, you know, if we all acknowledge we just need more grant, then let's find an easier way of pooling these different restrictions and just, you know, saying, look, if this borough wants to build this rented homes and they want to do it, then let's get rid of all the different rules and just say, what grant do we need and who's got what money, and let's just, you know, make it work. And it's just the most frustrating thing when everybody agrees, all parties agrees, they've all got something there, but the rules don't allow them to put it in, and let's rewrite the rules, you know.
Well, and what's stopping us from doing that if ultimately that's going to enable us to deliver more homes? Tom, you had your hand up.
No, that was me clapping what Geeta. It's so true, and it's the government. And the government, I think in 2018, that was the consultation they did on right to buy, and you know, the question of whether or not councils could combine the receipts with grant, and they've still not published the sort of their response to that consultation. And you know, we've set up the right to buy ring fence, which gives councils basically another 3 years beyond the 3 years they already have to spend that money. And we know 3 years is a very tight turnaround.
Tiny, yeah.
But it's the councils still struggle because they have to find other pots of funding to combine that right to buy receipt with. Never mind the fact that they don't get to keep the whole right to buy receipt, because they still have to give a whole chunk of it to the Treasury. So the government really need to sort that out. It should be something that's really low-hanging fruit, really. They should just sort it out.
I was also going to say the government, I'm afraid, because obviously quite a lot of local authorities now set up housing companies to try and tap into other forms of finance, and you know, there are forms of finance out there. They're not all yet coming to fruition, but even there is the frustration that both it is difficult to use both grant or right to buy receipts in the companies. You immediately fall foul of rules there, which really should be so much easier if it's a local authority developing new housing, where a company model is a better model because it can attract other financing, and yet you can't put your right to buy receipts in it. You've got to retain those in your HRA, which is more constrained for the other reasons that we've talked about, and maybe more constrained in terms of sites than the company model does. That's just a frustration, and we somehow need the Treasury to cut through it once and for all.
Yeah, and so we did a project last year which we're updating this year called Paying for It, and it's looking at the changing financial models for housing and regeneration projects. And just going back to your early comment, Tom and Geeta, I think there is more interest, isn't there, from investors in getting social returns on investment as well as financial returns, and wanting to take that longer term look, which is obviously, you know, what we would all want. So it's a matter of like, how do we, I don't know, what do we need to do to kind of influence the, you know, the investors, central government? I mean, obviously the sort of relationship between London and central government is a little bit tricky, to say the least. So it's like, how can we make this happen? It's almost like you're saying we just need to rewrite the rules. That sounds really simple, but what do you think is stopping us from being able to do that? Who's got the answer?
Well, I just don't think this is something that is sort of high. This particular issue is something that's high up the government's priority list at the moment, and you know, it's a very simple, sensible change, but I think they're focused on other things, like, you know, messing around with the planning system.
Yeah, someone has to listen. That's the point. You know, you can put the suggestions forward, but somebody has to listen, and it's very frustrating because we all know, we're sitting around this virtual table. We all know we could tap it out in 5 minutes. You know, change this, do this, and we could build this many more homes, and you know, etc. But it's somebody's got to listen to that, and it's difficult to know how you get those messages up to make that happen, to show we're not trying to fiddle anything. We're not trying to, you know, take a subsidy and, you know, not do something with it. We're trying to build homes. That's a very basic, you know, response. We all want to do it. We've all got that obligation, and that, you know, that's what we're here to do. We know that. So I think there's mistrust and all the rest of it. So it's just very frustrating. We need to find the same aim here, and this is how we do it. So let's get on with it.
Yeah, and I think it's jointly, very strongly jointly across the sector, making that point can do no harm. We did an interesting piece of work as London housing directors with the G15 and Savills, a really good piece of research work around a lot of the barriers, and finance being a big one. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the launch kind of never happened, and we need to get back to that with, you know, because it's still a really apposite piece of work, and that joint push from all of us who are trying to do it from our various sides to say, look, this isn't working, and we've got to change it.
One last question from me, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A for the audience. So it's just a question around land. Is that an opportunity, pooling land, working differently around how we actually access land to build affordable homes? Is there potential in there for us to kind of work differently and collaborate, do you think?
I think, you know, one of the things that's, you know, a real possibility is we've got many existing schemes that don't sort of they're end of life now, old shelter schemes or whatever there are. And we also have adjoining lands where we could make more by pulling them together. So I think there's opportunities there. I think Jackie's point around resident resistance, I thought that was a really good point, Jackie, because a lot of ways of de-risking development at the moment is to look at your existing land, because you don't need the subsidy, then you've got the land, but the difficulty is the climate and trust, I suppose, from residents around what you're going to do and where they're going to end up, and I think that could be quite a barrier as we look to go forward now, because there is lots of opportunities on there. It's always complicated and difficult. It's never the easy route, but it is where you get some really good partnerships, I think, where you can really look at the sort of educational needs. Do you need new schools? What's the type of housing you need? Let's rebuild it so you've got the right type of housing at the right rents. And there is quite a lot of opportunity there, but we do need to really think about that resident resistance and the pace of change in some of those things.
Yeah. Jackie and Tom, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are some interesting things around land, and there's some good things happening. And I agree with Geeta that reusing existing land and repurposing it, particularly where we've got adjoining public sector landowners, or even sometimes adjoining council and RP land holdings, and there's some of those in my own borough. They are in some ways quicker wins because we already own it. We've got to get it right. I'd also think about some of the stuff that TfL are doing around stations at the moment, of using TfL land for housing, where that's working closely with the local authority. That can give us some really good results.
Absolutely, and yeah, I mean TfL's development program has got some really sort of high quality schemes coming through on their land, and yeah, we're looking at GLA land across the piece. I think that another thing that we're looking at doing is to see what we can do to support councils around land assembly. I mean, CPO is always a struggle, fraught with difficulty, and I think some boroughs shy away from it because because it can be so complex. You could end up in court and it takes years. So we're looking at what support we could provide there. I also think, again, we need some action from the government on this. I mean, we were promised in the government's own manifesto that they would do something about the whole issue of hope value with CPO. And actually, if they were to do that, to reform land compensation, so councils were able to buy up more land closer to its existing use value, I mean that could really help to support and drive delivery of housing across all tenures, but particularly affordable housing.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you. What I'd like to do now is open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to invite the audience, if you would like to put your cameras on, stay on mute for now, but put your cameras on so that we can see you. I'm going to mop up some of the questions in the chat now, but if you want to add in, please do add in either into the chat or raise your digital hand. I've got an amazing team working behind the scenes, so I won't miss anybody out. But first of all, I guess I just want to pick up on a note from a note on the skills issue. I think that's quite a popular topic, from Jez Dyer from the One Public Estate Programme. And I met that team very recently. So the One Public Estate Programme manages a pool of experts which bring together skilled personnel from various fields who may be called upon when needed for very short-term or very long-term advice and capacity. And that can also be funded through the grants that are available from the One Public Estate Programme. So if you haven't been involved in that or made the most of that resource, then please do. And Jez, maybe if you want to put a link to the programme in the chat box, that would be really helpful. So let's go to the Q&A. So we've got a question it's probably for Geeta, from Lorraine Ford. Jackie mentioned issues with skills shortages and capacity. Is this also the case for housing associations? And if not, why is that the case?
I don't think it's so much the case for larger housing associations. Obviously, it's going to be dependent on the development programs that organisations have been running. So, you know, if you've had a good sized development program and you've been a long-term developer, then you have got those skills internally. There's always going to be peaks and troughs, you know, where you're competing with private sector and local authorities and everybody for the same skills, and there's not enough and you need to train people up. But, you know, generally, if you've been, you know, for us certainly, you know, we've been a long-term developer and we've got some very good skills within our teams, both on the sales side, on the development land assembly side, you know, because it's been part of our business for a long period of time. But it is, you know, it's more difficult for smaller and medium-sized associations, definitely, because, you know, they're not going to have the same output of homes, and therefore, you know, they're also having to compete with larger associations that may have bigger programs or, you know, more complicated things that are more interesting to work on. So, you know, I think we're always competing for good staff, and, you know, there are always some skills that are in demand, but I don't think it's the same when you're starting something up from scratch. It's more difficult because you have to have, you know, one of these and one of these and one of these. When you've got the establishment, you're bringing some skills from within bigger teams, but when you're starting from scratch, you know, and there's some risks as well, because people moving across will think, well, you know, do I stay here or do I go over here and take the risk? And so it's more complicated.
Jackie, did you have any thoughts on that? Or
I really agree with what Geeta's just said. I think if you've got more established programs, you've definitely got a head start on this. If you've got good supply chains already set up, you're likely to be able to keep those going. I think we're not noticing shortages being a major block at the moment, but it's obviously something you've always got your eye on. There's also the importance of with some of the areas of training and the training your own, and the sorts of schemes that are being developed, and Future of London have been involved in. You talked about it a little bit earlier, Nicola, of how you actually grow your own is really
I was just going to add briefly but what Geeta said is absolutely right about smaller housing associations, and that's why things like, you know, we've got things that like the Build London Partnership, which the GLA and L&Q run, which is a partnership that supports smaller housing associations to deliver new developments and make, you know, it's exactly the kind of partnership between a big organisation, you know, with a lot of staff and a lot of knowledge and experience, and smaller associations that have, you know, that haven't been delivering at scale for a while. It's exactly the kind of partnership that we need to be promoting.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next question is on density, and it's from Claire Benny. So outer London residents are not yet bought into density, as we've heard, but that's inevitably where intensification will happen now. How would the panel tackle this hearts and minds issue from scratch?
Shall I start on that one?
Yeah, go for it, Jackie.
So I think the first thing is about education, and one of the things that we're doing at the moment in Redbridge is beginning to work with residents, not just about looking at their particular scheme, but to explain where they sit in terms of density, because often people will think, oh, this is really high density. You actually look at the figures and it's not high density at all. It's not at all. They just don't get that. They think any sort of new build is really going to push them up in terms of densities. So I think it is beginning that education and that discussion piece, but it's also about talking and working with residents on good design. Because even we know that there are some fantastic examples of high density, not particularly high rise, well designed, well managed schemes, which are fantastic. If you're a resident in an outer London area that hasn't had a lot of building, that, as I said earlier, thinks that new build means towers and inner London type build, it's working with them to show them it doesn't need to be like that. And I also think there's no substitute for taking people to see things, see and feel it. So it's not just a talk and chalk. Obviously, at the moment, that's much more difficult. But that much more interactive work with residents and residents groups to get them to understand that that's not what we're talking about in Outer London. We're talking, should be talking about, if we're doing our job right, well designed, very high quality, well managed, higher density, but not high rise.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's also taking local residents, obviously it's difficult now, isn't it, to meet other local people that have been through the process, so they can kind of reassure them that it isn't all terrible, and actually is possible, like you say, to have beautifully designed dense developments. Tom or Geeta, did you want to come in on that? Or
well, I mean, just to say, I mean, I think Jack is absolutely right. I think one thing that has to be clear to people is, you know, what are they going to get out of it? You know, whether that's you know, making sure that there's you know, that we know that people are aware of what funding will come in to support community infrastructure through, you know, community infrastructure levy and things like that, because people are concerned about the impact on local services, and also whether or not the level of affordable housing as well, whether people think that this scheme is going to provide homes that they and their children would be able to live in and to afford. I think that's really important as well. You'll always get that group of people who will oppose all development, and you know, it's important to remember as well that just because some people shout the loudest doesn't mean that they're necessarily representative of the community as a whole. Anyone, you know, I've served on planning committees when I was on the council, and you know, you always have to remember that just because there's a group of people in the room protesting that they don't want development doesn't necessarily mean that they are representative of the community. And actually, one of your jobs as a councillor is to be able to sort of test the water across the community as a whole, not just in the room in the planning committee at the time. But you can win people over. I think you just, and I think the point about making the point that density doesn't necessarily mean height, that Jack, I think is really crucial as well.
Yeah, and I think there's also something about genuinely listening to people. I think consultation in some cases is just done as a tick box exercise, but people, it's all about trust, isn't it? It's all about the trust between the community and the local authority and developers, and we know the research has come out that trust isn't there. So it's about really genuinely listening to people and being able to demonstrate and sort of helping them engage in the process in a way that they can have real influence.
Yeah, I think talking in their language, you know, we're very good at just saying things which are very difficult to understand, you know, and people want to have that communication in a language that they can interpret. So when we say, well, there will be community benefit, and you know, that kind of absolutely, what is it? And you know, the things that are really important to them around schools and traffic and all those things, that we have a proper clear answer on all those things, which can be very minute, but it's kind of replaying it back in their language. I think that's sort of really important.
Yeah. And also recognizing that these things take years, 10, 15, 20 years. So we're talking about community benefit, but you might have years of disruption before local communities will kind of see that benefit, and it's acknowledging that, isn't it, and the impact that has on communities.
Yeah.
Right, I do want to get onto some more questions. We've got loads coming in. So this is an MMC question from John Skivington. So in terms of MMC, there is scope for collaborative organisations in London like the GLA, London Council's G15, Future of London, the London Housing Consortium coming together to share and aggregate demand. Who would like to take that one? Sounds like a Tom question to me.
So is in the there are several MMC questions in the chat that I've noticed. Oh, here we are, aggregating.
Yeah, so is there scope for collaborative organisations?
So I've got there were several in there, including there was one about councils and whether or not you know, because they often create jobs outside London rather than in London, whether councils would be sort of on board. But yes, I think there's a huge scope for collaboration, and this is something that we are scoping up at the moment at City Hall, exactly how we could collaborate in order to sort of build that pipeline and to drive demand. And also, again, this relates to one of the other MMC questions, whether or not we do invest in some sort of factory in London, which, you know, I don't believe in doing that just for the sake of doing it. It has to be something that adds value and is done for a reason and for a purpose. But it's certainly something that we are exploring, and I think could be really exciting, and I think some boroughs would be very interested in as well.
Jackie and Geeta, do you want to come on that, or we can move to the next question?
I agree with Tom on that one. We shouldn't discount factories in London, but we've got to make sure that they're actually what we need. And there are lots of other, in terms of local employment, there's lots of other ways that we can work on local employment around a development, even if the MMC is somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. Just the other MMC question is Alex Talbot. MMC offers much in the way of efficiency, and Homes England GLA are both huge supporters. However, for the councils, there are concerns about exporting construction opportunities well out of the borough. How can London boroughs collaborate to develop factories inside the city? So the question, the point we've just made, that can have sufficient demand to be financially viable. So what's the sort of the plan for taking forward that discussion, Tom, on the potential for a London factory?
It's something that we're scoping up at the moment, and as I say, it's something where, you know, we have to be sure that we can add value. There might be other ways that we can support MMC that don't involve that, but I think we should be thinking quite boldly and quite radically about this, particularly in light of, you know, as I said, some of the impending shortages, if we've got shortages already, of construction workers in light of things like Brexit. We have to be acting now. I think now is the time. I met with Mark Farmer recently, who's, you know, the sort of government's MMC czar, if you want to call him that. Really, really brilliant, really interesting, and they've got a report out on this recently. I think now is the time to strike when it comes to precision manufactured housing.
Thank you. Right, we're going to take a question to go on to think about shared ownership, then we're going to go back to there's quite a few skills questions as well. So shared ownership question from Luke Tozer. What do the panel think would be the impact of the proposed changes to shared ownership?
Well, I think one of the you know, a couple of the key issues really is it a marginal home ownership product? So, you know, there's going to be lots of questions about lending on it, and you know, what incomes people should have in order to be able to enter. And I think there's going to be, you know, the big issue is really around the repairs, and therefore the grant rate that's required in order to make it viable as a, you know, as a sort of home ownership product in order for delivery. So you know, what will it have? I think there will be quite a few organisations that just won't want to bid for that because they won't see it as you know, the right product for the right people. And obviously because it's new, the risks that are involved with it. So I think it will have an impact on delivery overall. I think now is this time to try and make it something which we can deliver on, because, you know, there is this sort of window for consultation, and, you know, we need to find a way, I think, because shared ownership is a really important product. It's, you know, hugely important. It's while we have peaks and troughs, it works. You know, we carry on delivering it. It's the only way for many people to access home ownership. But, you know, we need to find a way of carrying on delivering it and making it viable. But there are risks with this new product. I think that is the case. There are just risks associated with it, and it's probably a little bit too early to see how it's going to land. But I think there will be quite a few associations that don't want to bid because of that change.
Tom, or Jackie, any responses to that?
So I sort of take a slightly different view. I think that there are issues with the shared ownership model, and one of those consistently has been the fact that, you know, the shared owners are liable for 100% of the taxpayers on the property, but they might only own 25%. There are other issues, but that are not just shared ownership, that are tied up with all the issues around leasehold, which of course is has become a growing issue, and particularly in light of the cladding scandal at the moment. So, I mean, I welcome from a consumer perspective, I would welcome some of the changes that have been proposed to shared ownership. I agree that it probably means, though, that some housing associations might be put off from bidding. I think the government should have engaged with housing associations before making the announcement, because I think that having that conversation in advance might have helped to iron out some of the difficulties. Now they've announced it, I think it was very difficult for them to sort of make any significant changes to it. What I would say, in London, of course, we do fund the London Living Rent product, which is through our AHP is a rent to buy product. So, you know, I would encourage partners to bid for that in the new AHP, perhaps if they are struggling a bit with the new model of shared ownership.
Okay, thanks, Tom. We've got a couple more questions, so we're going for about another 5 minutes or so. So we've got 2 skills questions. So one is from Stephen Hill. Hello, Stephen. Read Jackie's suggestion for sharing skills and experience. Is there a role for the growing public practice associates model, but also recruiting the older and possibly near around retirement housing development managers as mentors or short-term task teams for boroughs?
Shall I start on that one?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the public practice model. I think it's working well. I think it's really bringing people certainly into local authorities who probably wouldn't have come into local authorities, and I think the experience of the people that have come in, not just in my own borough, but in other boroughs that I talk to, has been almost universally excellent. So I think there is a real place for that, and it has brought people in. The mentoring, yes, I mean, and I think that is a really good point. We touched on earlier, we've got an ageing workforce in a lot of these areas, but people who've got huge amounts of skill and dedication, and I think if we could set up some sort of mentoring scheme, maybe that's a job for Future of London. I think that's a really good idea, and I think a lot of the people that I know who are coming to retiring age in development would probably really welcome doing that, and it would be something that would be very beneficial to new entrants into the market.
Yeah,
there's no such thing as retirement anymore, is there really?
Nah.
Not until you're about 85 or 90 or something. And in fact, we're working on a project called the Emerging Talent Programme, which is all about addressing the lack of diversity in the housing and regen sectors. So it's all about bringing in fresh talent, but particularly those that have got the capacity for leadership in the sector. So we are looking, as is a plug for our programme, looking for housing associations, local authorities and private developers to be hosts for people, to offer them placements. But one of the important part of that sort of experience, and we want to give people the experience of working in a local authority and a housing association and in the private sector, will be having mentors, a consistent mentor throughout the 21-month programme. And I think that's a great idea to maybe pull some people out of semi-retirement to really help people understand how the sector works and how to get ahead, really. If you want to know anything about that, if one of my colleagues could put a link to the Emerging Talent Programme in the chat, that would be really helpful. Right, I want maybe to do 1 or 2 more questions. We've got another skills question from my colleague Ollie. So Jackie's point about sharing resources and bulk buying materials and services across the boroughs is important. There must be a lot of economies of scale and scope for the boroughs can take advantage of. With the GLA coordination or a borough lead, could housing associations all get involved and build stronger relationships? So Jackie, I don't know. Geeta.
Yeah, it always sounds easy, this. It always does. You always think this should be easy, and I don't know why, but it never quite is, because people do things at different times and they have different frameworks, and you know, you always think it should be easy to sort of, you know, everybody's got a common goal and bulk buying should be cheaper, and every time I know we try to do it, it just, you know, it never quite lands, other than if there's a sort of proper procurement framework which is shared. And some of that's worked really well. Some of those, you know, using that, we've used other people's procurement frameworks for things, and that's worked well. But if you've all got your own, it gets quite tough. So I think there's lots of merit in it. I still can't unpick why it's so difficult, but it just does seem to be. And you sort of think PPE, things like this, you know, there should be a simple way with this, shouldn't there, you know, with this crisis. But even that doesn't feel like it's simple either.
Right. Jackie, do you want to come in on that? Because I know we had a conversation before about the fact that you've tried to do that, and it has happened, but it just took a really long time. So maybe reflect on what would make it easier and less complicated and painful. If
You're on mute.
yeah, just need to unmute yourself. Could you just, sorry, maybe I can do it.
Yeah, excellent. I'm back on. Yeah, I'm with Geeta on that. Why is this so difficult? But it seems to be really difficult to get consistency, even across schemes, if you're working with different contractors, never mind across organisations. I think it's about something about specifications, isn't it? It is about using the same frameworks, but it's about how we specify products within the overall build programme. And getting consistency is difficult also because you've got to consider long-term repair and maintenance obligations, and different organisations will be in very, very different places with that. So what seems quite simple actually needs a whole system rethink to make it happen effectively. It's why MMC just seems so attractive, because it's a new product, you're starting from scratch. Maybe that's the way that we actually do it, rather than trying to shoehorn it in more traditional builds, which it just feels very, very difficult. Having said that, I do agree with some of the basic stuff, and PPE is such a good example, Geeta. It cannot be beyond our wit to set up a single contract that many of us buy into. Certainly, possibly sub-regionally, if not regionally. And I did see in the chat there was a question about the role of sub-regions. And I think this is one where there may well be a role of sub-regions to try and get groups of boroughs and RPs within an area to collaborate more effectively on this, and try it by steps rather than go to a whole big bang approach, which always seems to elude us.
That's great. Tom, did you want to come in on that? Oh,
I think everything's been said on that front.
Okay, I think we just check we've got any more questions. All right, so we've got one last question, which is less about collaboration, but I guess very much about, are we going to be able to deliver as much affordable homes as possible? So the question is from Alex Tolbert: does London have a chance of meeting its housing requirements without reforming the Green Belt? Tom, do you want to take that one first?
Well, the mayor's got a very clear policy that we do not build on the Green Belt, and it's right that we go, that we continue the brownfield first policy. I think the key issue from my perspective is getting the investment in that we need. If you look at the assessed need for housing in London, 32,500 of these homes need to be affordable, of which the vast bulk need to be for low cost rent. And unless we get the necessary level of finance to deliver those, we're not going to get up to that level. So for me, that is the crucial thing.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Jackie and Geeta.
I think I was one that always said I think we need to go on the Green Belt, and that there was lots of bits of the Green Belt that were easy to develop on, and we've had those debates about the sort of lovely bits of the Green Belt and the trashy bits of the Green Belt and the accessible bits and the non-accessible. But I do think with this whole change of city centres, town centres, high streets that's coming. Or, you know, it's been here for a while, but, you know, accelerated through sort of the online world, online shopping world, retail world, etc. That's coming, and that whole change and debate that there's going to be about place in terms of where you live, work, have leisure within localities. Probably there's that opportunity if we sort of think about, rather than converting some of those poor offices to residential, but we actually think about knocking down and rebuilding, and, you know, providing some very good quality homes right in city centres. And that can be, you know, that can be for rent. It can also be for, you know, older people, retirement living, and we really rethink some of these areas. It's that, I think it's a really sort of good opportunity, you know, coming our way to look at how we can build more housing into local places now. So I suppose I'm more optimistic than I was before that, you know, actually there's a better conversation to be had around sort of the brownfield sites.
Thanks, Geeta. Jackie, last word.
Not much to add. I think Geeta said it all there. I think there is a place sometimes for looking at individual sites on the green belt, and that we shouldn't completely forever rule it out, but actually densification around town centres gives us, and the changing nature of town centres does give us quite a lot of opportunities at the minute. And really agree with the point about retirement living, because that's so often, older people so often get forgotten in all of this, but actually building in good homes for older people around town centres is absolutely vital, and would free up potentially in the low cost rental market, that has the potential to free up bigger family homes that they're currently under occupying, and we know there are huge rates of under occupation. So it could give us a win-win. We just have to plan it really carefully.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie, and absolutely echo your point, Geeta, about older people. We did a project called Aging Cities, where we interviewed lots of older people about their sort of aspirations, and so many of them wanted to be in the middle of things rather than being this sort of assumption that everyone wants to be piled out into the countryside or by the seaside. Actually, people want to be in the centre of it and have access to culture and transport and all of that. So I think,
yeah, I do, definitely. That's what I want. I want to be right in town, as far in as I can get.
Yeah, on top of it. Yeah. Right, I'm going to draw us to a close. Thank you so much to our panel, to Geeta, to Jackie, and to Tom. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and it's just nice to see that there is, you know, sort of light at the end of the tunnel. There's lots of potential for the public sector to work together. It is going to be hard work, yes, but I think what we've heard today is that there is definitely merit in kind of trying to get these things off the ground, and maybe opportunities for kind of combined campaigning to just change the regulations to make it easier for things like cross subsidy and funding. So thank you very much. Also, thank you to the G15 for sponsoring the event. The G15 obviously have their offer for London, and we're going to send out with a follow-up email from this event some publications and documents around the offer for London. So please do take a look at those. Just to say, just a couple of things that are coming up for Future of London. So I'm going to have to look through another screen, apologies. We've got our next Future London leaders are presenting their proposals for London. So they've got their big ideas for London on the theme of health and wellbeing. That's on the 7th of October. You're very welcome to join their graduation and hear their really inspiring ideas. If you're in a local authority and involved in direct delivery of homes or in a housing company, then our council-led housing forum is on the 20th of October, and that's about managing the design process. How can we maintain your design aspiration from concept to delivery? We've got our first digital conference, 26th to the 30th of October, which is on the topic of achieving net zero. So really exciting, got some amazing speakers, and that's all about the practicalities of how we're going to meet our net zero targets. And then we've got an alumni communities of practice on the 3rd of November, which is looking at new localism. So you're very, very welcome to join us for those events. Thank you very much for everyone for attending today. And thanks for your questions and your comments. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you very soon. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.